Young woman abandons her family. 5 years later, she faces her worst punishment. Amber Sullivan stood in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. At 22, she felt trapped in her small Colorado town. The sound of her parents' voices drifted up from downstairs, reminding her of the argument they'd had earlier. "Amber, you have a future here," her father, John, had insisted. "The antique store is your legacy." "I don't want to spend my life dusting old furniture," Amber had retorted. "I want to be an actress, to make something of myself." Her mother, Margaret, had tried to mediate. "Honey, we just want what's best for you." But Amber knew what was best for her, and it wasn't this town. As night fell, Amber made her decision. She quietly packed her bags, stuffing them with clothes and a few prized possessions. Her heart raced as she glanced at the clock. 2 a.m. Perfect. Amber crept downstairs, wincing at every creak of the old floorboards. In the kitchen, she scribbled a note. "Mom and Dad, I can't stay here anymore. I'm going to LA to pursue my dreams. Please don't try to find me. I need to do this on my own. Amber." She placed the note on the kitchen table, her hand trembling slightly. For a moment, guilt overwhelmed her. She thought of her parents waking up to find her gone, of the pain she would cause them. But the thought of staying, of watching her dreams wither away, was unbearable. Amber slipped out the front door, closing it softly behind her. The cool night air hit her face as she walked to her car, parked a block away to avoid suspicion. As she drove past the "Welcome to Pine Grove" sign, a mix of emotions washed over her. Excitement for the future and a deep, gnawing guilt. The sun was rising as Amber crossed the Colorado state line. She turned on the radio, trying to drown out her thoughts. What would her parents do when they found her note? Would they try to find her? She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the road ahead. Hours later, Amber saw the Los Angeles skyline in the distance. Her heart leaped with anticipation. This was it, her chance to become someone, to prove herself. She had no idea of the challenges that awaited her, but in that moment, all she felt was hope. As Amber entered the city, navigating through unfamiliar streets, she allowed herself a small smile. She was here, ready to conquer Los Angeles and make her dreams come true. Little did she know, the city had other plans for her. Back in Pine Grove, John Sullivan woke up early, as he always did. He made his way to the kitchen, expecting to find Amber there. Instead, he found the note. His hands shook as he read it, the words blurring before his eyes. "Margaret," he called out, his voice cracking. "Margaret, come down here." Margaret rushed downstairs, alarmed by the panic in her husband's voice. When she read the note, she collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "She's gone," Margaret whispered, clutching the piece of paper. "Our baby's gone." John paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "I'll call the police. We'll find her. We'll bring her home." But deep down, they both knew. Amber had made her choice. Their daughter had left them behind, chasing a dream that seemed impossibly far away. As the sun rose over Pine Grove, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, the Sullivan family's world had been turned upside down. And in Los Angeles, Amber Sullivan was about to learn that dreams come at a price, one she might not be prepared to pay. Amber's first weeks in Los Angeles were a whirlwind of hope and disappointment. She threw herself into the audition circuit, her portfolio filled with headshots and a resume padded with high school plays. But the city was teeming with aspiring actresses, all vying for the same roles. "Next!" the casting director's voice rang out, dismissing Amber after barely a glance. This scene repeated itself countless times. Amber left each audition with a forced smile, her confidence chipping away with each rejection. One day, Amber stumbled upon an open casting call for a major network drama. She spent days preparing, rehearsing lines until she could recite them in her sleep. The initial audition went well, and to her surprise, she was called back for a second round. "You've got something special," the director told her after her performance. Amber's heart soared. This was it, her big break. But the next day, her phone rang. "I'm sorry, Amber," the casting assistant said. "We've decided to go in a different direction." Amber hung up, her hands shaking. She had been so close. The disappointment was crushing, leaving her questioning everything she'd sacrificed to be here. With her savings dwindling, Amber was forced to take on odd jobs to survive. She waited tables at a dingy diner, scrubbed floors in office buildings, and even dressed up as a cartoon character for children's parties. Each job felt like a step further away from her dreams. One night, as Amber cleared tables at the diner, a man in a suit caught her eye. He was watching her intently, and when she approached his table, he introduced himself. "I'm Derek," he said, flashing a charming smile. "I couldn't help but notice you. You've got presence. Are you an actress?" Amber's heart skipped a beat. "I'm trying to be," she admitted. Derek nodded knowingly. "I'm a producer. I've got a good eye for talent, and I think you've got potential. Here's my card. Give me a call if you're interested in discussing some opportunities." Amber clutched the card, hope rekindling in her chest. Maybe her luck was finally turning around. The next day, Amber met Derek at a trendy cafe. He spoke animatedly about the industry, dropping names of famous actors and directors. Amber listened, captivated by the world he described. "I've got a project that might be perfect for you," Derek said, leaning in close. "It's not conventional, but it could be your ticket to bigger things." Amber's excitement faltered. "What do you mean, not conventional?" Derek's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's just say it requires a certain openness. But trust me, it's how many stars got their start. You want to make it in this town, right?" Amber nodded hesitantly. "Then you've got to be willing to do whatever it takes," Derek continued. "This industry isn't for the faint of heart. You've got to be willing to push boundaries." As Derek outlined the opportunity, Amber felt a growing unease. This wasn't what she had imagined when she dreamed of becoming an actress. But after months of rejection and financial struggle, the prospect of a real role, any role, was tempting. "Think it over," Derek said as they parted. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Amber walked home, her mind in turmoil. She thought of her parents back in Pine Grove, of the life she'd left behind. She thought of her dreams of stardom, now tarnished by the harsh realities of Hollywood. Standing in her tiny, run-down apartment, Amber stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The girl who had arrived in Los Angeles full of hope seemed like a stranger now. She was tired, disillusioned, and dangerously close to giving up. But beneath the exhaustion, a flicker of determination still burned. She had come too far to turn back now. The question was, how far was she willing to go to keep her dreams alive? Amber picked up her phone, Derek's card in her other hand. She had a decision to make, one that would shape the course of her future in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As she dialed the number, Amber wondered if this was the beginning of her Hollywood success story, or the start of a dangerous descent into a world she wasn't prepared for. The phone rang and Amber held her breath. Whatever came next, there was no turning back now. Amber's decision to accept Derek's offer marked a turning point in her life. The unconventional project turned out to be a series of low-budget, risque films that made Amber uncomfortable. But with each compromising role, she told herself it was just a stepping stone. "You're doing great," Derek would say, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "This is how stars are made." Meanwhile, in Pine Grove, John and Margaret Sullivan were living a nightmare. John spent his days calling detective agencies, draining the family's savings in his desperate search for Amber. "She's out there somewhere," John insisted, poring over maps and reports. "We'll find her." Margaret, once vibrant and cheerful, had fallen into a deep depression. She spent hours sitting in Amber's room, clutching her daughter's old teddy bear. As Christmas approached, the Sullivans faced the harsh reality of their first holiday without Amber. They sat at the dinner table, an empty chair a stark reminder of their loss. "Remember how she used to sing carols?" Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. John nodded, his eyes glistening. "She'll come home, Margaret. She has to." But as the months turned into years, hope began to fade. The antique store, once the pride of the family, fell into disrepair as John's obsession with finding Amber consumed him. Back in Los Angeles, Amber's career was slowly gaining traction. She landed small roles in TV shows and commercials, each one a small victory. But with each success came a growing sense of emptiness. One night, after a particularly difficult shoot, Amber found herself at a Hollywood party. The room was filled with industry players, all laughing and drinking as if they didn't have a care in the world. Derek appeared at her side, champagne in hand. "You're making waves, Amber," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "People are starting to talk about you." Amber forced a smile, but inside, she felt hollow. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? To be noticed, to be somebody in this town? As the party wore on, Amber overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two executives were talking about Derek, unaware that she could hear. "That guy's a real piece of work," one said. "Uses these young actresses, promises them the world, then tosses them aside when he's done." "Yeah, heard he's got a new one now," the other replied. "Some small-town girl, Amber, something." Realization hit Amber like a ton of bricks. She had been naive, so desperate for success that she had allowed herself to be manipulated. Derek had never cared about her talent. She was just another pawn in his game. Amber left the party in a daze, her mind reeling. She had compromised so much, thinking it was the price of success. But at what cost? She hardly recognized herself anymore. As she walked home, Amber passed a store window decorated for Christmas. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger in designer clothes and heavy makeup. Suddenly, she was hit with a vivid memory of her last Christmas in Pine Grove. She saw herself decorating the tree with her parents, laughing as her dad struggled with the lights. The warmth of that memory contrasted sharply with the cold reality of her life now. For the first time in years, Amber allowed herself to really think about her parents. What had her disappearance done to them? The guilt she had suppressed for so long came rushing back. Amber's phone buzzed with a message from Derek about an upcoming audition. She stared at it, feeling trapped. She had come so far, given up so much. Could she walk away now? The next morning, Amber woke up determined to make a change. She couldn't undo the past 5 years, but she could control her future. She decided to distance herself from Derek and focus on finding more respectable roles. To her surprise, this new approach started to pay off. Directors began to notice her for her talent rather than her willingness to compromise. Small but meaningful roles came her way, each one a step towards the career she had originally dreamed of. 5 years after leaving Pine Grove, Amber found herself sitting in a casting office, reading for a major role in a new drama series. As she delivered her lines, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine passion for acting. The director leaned forward, intrigued. "That was excellent, Amber. We'd like you to come back for a screen test." As Amber left the office, a mix of emotions washed over her. Excitement for this new opportunity, regret for the choices she had made, and a deep longing for the family she had left behind. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a number she knew by heart. It was time to face the consequences of her actions. As the phone rang, Amber took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. It was time to go home. Amber sat in her apartment, staring at the script for her upcoming screen test. After years of struggle, her career was finally taking off. The phone rang, interrupting her concentration. She answered, expecting it to be her agent. "Is this Amber Sullivan?" an unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "I'm calling from Pine Grove Memorial Hospital. Your parents have been in a car accident." The world seemed to stop. Amber's hand shook as she gripped the phone. "Are they okay?" "They're in critical condition. You should come as soon as possible." Without hesitation, Amber booked the first flight to Colorado. As the plane took off, guilt and fear consumed her. She hadn't spoken to her parents in 5 years, and now she might never get the chance. Arriving in Pine Grove, Amber rushed to the hospital. The familiar small-town streets felt foreign after so long. At the reception, she gave her name with trepidation. "Your father is awake," the nurse said. "Your mother is still unconscious." Amber entered her father's room, her heart pounding. John Sullivan looked older, his face lined with worry and grief. When he saw Amber, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Amber?" he whispered. "Dad, I'm so sorry," Amber said, tears streaming down her face. John's expression hardened. 5 years, Amber. 5 years without a word. "I know, Dad. I messed up. Save it," John interrupted. "I don't want to hear your excuses." Amber recoiled at his harsh tone. She had expected anger, but the coldness in his voice cut deep. Over the next few days, Amber split her time between her parents' hospital rooms. Her mother remained unresponsive, while her father's resentment grew with each interaction. One afternoon, Amber overheard a conversation between her father and a nurse. "Mr. Sullivan, you need to rest," the nurse insisted. "I can't," John replied. "The store." "What about the store?" Amber interjected, entering the room. John glared at her. "As if you care. You left it all behind, remember?" "Dad, please, I want to help." "Help? Where were you when we were about to lose the store? When your mother fell into depression?" Amber felt like she'd been slapped. "What do you mean, lose the store?" John laughed bitterly. "Oh, now you're interested. We almost lost everything looking for you. The store, the house, all of it." The full impact of her actions hit Amber. She had been so focused on her own dreams, she never considered the devastation she left behind. Determined to make amends, Amber went to see the family store. The sight shocked her. The once thriving business was now a shadow of its former self. Dust covered the antiques, and a for sale sign hung in the window. As Amber stood there, a familiar voice called out, "Amber? Is that really you?" She turned to see Mrs. Thompson, her old neighbor. The older woman's face was a mix of surprise and disapproval. "We've all been worried sick," Mrs. Thompson said. "Your parents? They've never been the same." Amber listened as Mrs. Thompson recounted the past 5 years. How her parents had searched tirelessly for her. How her mother had stopped participating in community events. How her father had become a recluse, focused solely on finding her and keeping the store afloat. The weight of her actions pressed down on Amber. It wasn't just her family she had hurt, but the entire community. Returning to the hospital, Amber made a decision. She couldn't undo the past, but she could try to make things right. "Dad," she said, entering his room, "I'm staying. I want to help with the store, with everything." John looked at her skeptically. "What about your big Hollywood career?" Amber shook her head. "This is more important. I need to make things right." For the first time since her return, John's expression softened slightly. "It won't be easy, Amber. There's a lot of damage to undo." "I know," Amber replied, "but I'm ready to try." As she left the hospital that night, Amber called her agent. "I'm sorry, but I have to postpone the screen test." A family emergency came up. Her agent protested, warning her about the opportunity she was risking. But Amber stood firm. She knew she was potentially sacrificing her rising career, but for the first time in years, she felt she was making the right choice. Amber looked at the "for sale" sign in the store window. Tomorrow she would take it down. It was time to rebuild what she had broken, no matter how long it took. Amber woke early, determined to start work on the antique store. As she walked down Main Street, the familiar sight stirred a mix of emotions. She paused outside the store, taking a deep breath before unlocking the door. Inside, dust covered every surface. Amber grabbed a broom and started sweeping, her mind racing with ideas to revitalize the business. She was so focused that she didn't hear the bell above the door ring. "Amber, is that you?" She spun around, coming face to face with Luke, her high school sweetheart. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes were as kind as she remembered. "Luke," she breathed. "Hi." An awkward silence fell between them. Luke broke it first. "I heard about your parents. I'm sorry." Amber nodded. "Thanks. I'm trying to get the store back in shape while they recover." Luke offered to help, and soon they were working side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. As they worked, Luke filled her in on the town's happenings. He was now a lawyer, engaged to be married in the fall. The news of Luke's engagement hit Amber harder than she expected. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. Over the next few days, Amber split her time between the store and the hospital. Her mother remained unresponsive, but Amber sat with her, talking about her plans for the store, hoping her voice might somehow reach her. Her father's attitude remained frosty, but Amber persisted. She showed him the changes she was making to the store, seeking his advice on inventory and pricing. Slowly, she saw his demeanor soften, even if only slightly. One afternoon, as Amber was sorting through old ledgers, she overheard a conversation outside. Two women were discussing the impending closure of the town library. "It's such a shame," one said. "That library's been here for generations." Amber's interest was piqued. She remembered spending countless hours in that library as a child. Its closure would be a significant loss to the community. She decided to investigate, walking to the library after closing the store. The librarian, Mrs. Patel, greeted her with surprise. "Amber Sullivan, as I live and breathe. It's been a long time." Amber smiled sheepishly. "Too long, Mrs. Patel. I heard the library might be closing?" Mrs. Patel's face fell. "I'm afraid so. Budget cuts. We can't keep up with the maintenance costs." As they talked, Amber realized the library's closure was just one symptom of a larger problem. The town was struggling, businesses were closing, and the sense of community she remembered was fading. The weight of her absence hit her anew. While she had been chasing her dreams in Los Angeles, her hometown had been slowly dying. She couldn't help but feel partly responsible. Returning to the store, Amber found Luke waiting for her. He had brought dinner, knowing she'd been working late. As they ate, Amber shared her discoveries about the library and the town's struggles. "It's not your fault, Amber," Luke said, reading her expression. "These problems started long before you left." But Amber couldn't shake the guilt. "I should have been here, Luke. I abandoned everyone." Luke's hand found hers across the table. The touch sent a jolt through Amber, reminding her of their shared past. For a moment, they both forgot about the years that had passed, the changes they'd been through. Then Luke pulled his hand away, a conflicted look in his eyes. "I should go," he said, standing abruptly. "Clara will be waiting." Amber nodded, remembering his fiancée. "Of course, thanks for dinner." After Luke left, Amber sat alone in the store, surrounded by remnants of the past. She realized that coming home hadn't just meant facing her parents, but confronting everything and everyone she had left behind. As she was locking up, a familiar car pulled up outside. Amber's blood ran cold as Derek stepped out, his trademark smirk in place. "Surprise, sweetheart," he called out. "Thought I'd come see what was so important you had to bail on your big break." Amber stood frozen, the key in the lock. Just when she thought she was making progress, her past had come back to haunt her. Derek's presence threatened to unravel everything she was trying to rebuild. "We need to talk, Amber," Derek said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You owe me, and I'm here to collect." As Derek approached, Amber realized that her journey home had just become much more complicated. The ghosts of her past weren't done with her yet, and the hardest battles were still to come. Amber stood face to face with Derek outside the antique store. His presence brought back memories of her time in Los Angeles, memories she'd been trying to forget. "What are you doing here, Derek?" Amber asked, her voice tense. Derek smirked. "You left without a word, Amber. We had a deal, remember? I made you who you are." "That's in the past," Amber replied. "I'm done with that life." Derek's eyes narrowed. "It's not that simple. I've got dirt on you, sweetheart. Enough to ruin any chance you have of a career or a normal life here." Amber felt her heart race. "What do you want? Come back to LA. I've got a new project lined up. You bail on me again, and I'll make sure everyone in this quaint little town knows exactly what you've been up to these past 5 years." The threat hung in the air. Amber knew Derek wasn't bluffing. He had the power to destroy not just her reputation, but potentially her family's as well. "I need time to think," Amber said finally. Derek nodded. "You've got 48 hours. Then I start making calls." As Derek drove away, Amber felt her world spinning. She had worked so hard to make amends, and now it could all fall apart. The next day, Amber threw herself into work at the store, trying to distract herself from Derek's ultimatum. Luke stopped by to help, sensing something was wrong. "Want to talk about it?" he asked gently. Amber shook her head. "I can't, Luke. It's complicated." They worked in silence for a while, the tension palpable. As they were moving a heavy dresser, their hands brushed. They both froze, the physical contact igniting old feelings. Before Amber could think, Luke had pulled her close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. For a moment, the world disappeared. Then reality came crashing back. Amber pulled away, breathless. "We can't, Luke. You're engaged." Luke stepped back, looking shocked at his own actions. "I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me." They both retreated to opposite sides of the store, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Later that evening, Amber sat in the back office, poring over the store's finances. The situation was dire. They needed a miracle to keep the doors open. An idea struck her. She remembered the library's impending closure. What if she could kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Amber began drafting a plan to turn part of the antique store into a community space, including a small library. It could bring in foot traffic and potentially secure some funding from the town. As she worked on her proposal, Amber felt a wave of nausea hit her. She dismissed it as stress, but a nagging thought persisted in the back of her mind. The next morning, Amber woke early, feeling ill again. With a growing sense of dread, she drove to the pharmacy 2 towns over, not wanting to risk being seen. Back at home, Amber stared at the pregnancy test in disbelief. Positive. She was pregnant with Luke's child. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. This changed everything. She couldn't leave now, but staying meant facing Derek's threats and the potential fallout with Luke and his fiancée. Amber's phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Time's up. What's your decision?" She stared at the message, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. She had 24 hours to figure out how to protect her family, save the store, keep her secrets, and now, deal with an unexpected pregnancy. The antique store's bell rang, snapping Amber out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Luke entering, his face a mask of confusion and guilt. "Amber, we need to talk about what happened," he said. Amber nodded, her throat tight. She had to tell him about the pregnancy, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she upend his life when she could barely handle her own? As Luke approached, Amber steeled herself. Whatever happened next would change all their lives forever. The ghosts of her past, the challenges of her present, and the uncertainties of her future all converged at this moment. With a deep breath, Amber prepared to face the most difficult conversation of her life, knowing that her next words would set in motion a chain of events that could either save or destroy everything she held dear. Amber stood frozen as Luke approached, her mind racing. She couldn't tell him about the pregnancy, not yet. Not when everything was so uncertain. "Luke, "I can't do this right now," Amber said, stepping back. "I need some time to think." Luke's face fell, but he nodded. "I understand. I shouldn't have kissed you. It was a mistake." His words stung, even though Amber knew they were true. She watched him leave, feeling more alone than ever. Over the next few days, Amber threw herself into work at the store. She rearranged displays, updated the inventory system, and started an online presence for the business. Anything to keep her mind off her growing list of problems. Derek's calls and texts became more frequent and threatening. "Time's running out, Amber," his latest message read. "Make the right choice, or everyone learns your dirty little secrets." Amber's hand shook as she read the text. She knew she had to find a way to neutralize Derek's threats, but how? Meanwhile, Luke kept his distance, but Amber could feel his eyes on her whenever they crossed paths in town. The tension between them was palpable, and Amber knew people were starting to notice. One afternoon, as Amber was closing up the store, she felt another wave of nausea hit her. She barely made it to the bathroom in time. As she rinsed her mouth, she heard the store bell ring. "We're closed," she called out weakly. "Amber, are you okay?" It was Luke's voice. Panic rose in Amber's chest. She couldn't face him. Not like this. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just a little under the weather." Luke's footsteps approached the bathroom door. "You don't sound fine. Let me help." For a moment, Amber considered telling him everything. The pregnancy, Derek's threats, her fears for the future. The words were on the tip of her tongue. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was the hospital. "Ms. Sullivan, there's been a change in your mother's condition. You should come right away." The moment was lost. "I have to go," Amber told Luke, rushing past him without meeting his eyes. At the hospital, Amber found her father already in her mother's room. Margaret's fingers had twitched, the first sign of movement since the accident. As they waited for the doctor, John turned to Amber. "Who's Derek?" Amber felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "I overheard you on the phone yesterday," John said, his voice hard. "He's threatening you, isn't he?" "What's going on, Amber?" Amber opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could she explain her past to her father? How could she make him understand the choices she'd made? Before she could formulate a response, a commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Luke burst into the room, out of breath. "Amber, we need to talk," he said urgently. "Clara found out about the kiss. She's calling off the engagement." Amber's world spun. Everything was unraveling faster than she could handle. Her pregnancy, Derek's threats, her parents' condition, and now Luke's relationship falling apart because of her. As she looked between her father's suspicious face and Luke's pleading eyes, Amber felt the weight of her secrets crushing her. She had to make a choice. Keep lying and risk losing everything, or come clean and face the consequences. Just then, a small sound caught everyone's attention. Margaret's eyes were fluttering open. "Mom?" Amber whispered, moving closer to the bed. Margaret's gaze focused on Amber, recognition dawning in her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek as she weakly squeezed Amber's hand. In that moment, facing her mother's fragile state and the turmoil she had caused, Amber made her decision. No more lies. No more secrets. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face her father and Luke. "There's something I need to tell you both," she began, her voice shaking. "I'm pregnant." The room fell silent, the beeping of Margaret's heart monitor the only sound. Amber watched as shock, confusion, and a myriad of other emotions played across the faces of the two men. As the weight of her words settled in the room, Amber knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth was out, but the real challenge was only beginning. The room fell silent after Amber's revelation. John's face turned red with anger, while Luke stood in shock. Before anyone could respond, Margaret's voice, weak but clear, broke the tension. "Amber?" she whispered. All eyes turned to Margaret. She was fully awake now, her gaze fixed on her daughter. Amber moved closer to the bed, her heart pounding. "Mom, I'm here," Amber said, reaching for her mother's hand. To everyone's surprise, Margaret pulled her hand away. "You left us," she said, her voice filled with hurt. "You just disappeared." Amber felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, Mom. I'm so sorry." John stepped forward, his anger momentarily forgotten. "Margaret, honey, how are you feeling?" Margaret's eyes darted between John and Amber, confusion and pain evident on her face. "Why is she here?" she asked John. "There was an accident," John explained gently. Amber came back when she heard. Margaret closed her eyes, processing this information. The room was tense, everyone unsure of what to say or do next. After what felt like an eternity, Margaret opened her eyes again. She looked at Amber, really looked at her, and her expression softened slightly. "You're pregnant?" she asked. Amber nodded, unable to speak. Margaret sighed deeply. "Oh, Amber, what have you done?" The dam broke. Amber began to sob, years of pent-up emotions pouring out. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. For leaving, for not calling, for disappointing you." To everyone's surprise, Margaret reached out and took Amber's hand. "Come here," she said softly. Amber leaned in, and Margaret wrapped her arms around her daughter. They cried together, years of separation and hurt melting away in that embrace. John watched the scene unfold, torn between joy at his wife's recovery and the shock of Amber's news. Luke stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of his place in this family moment. When Amber and Margaret finally separated, Margaret turned to John. "Did you know about this?" she asked, gesturing to Amber's stomach. John shook his head. "She just told us, right before you woke up." Margaret looked at Luke. "And you're the father?" Luke nodded, his face pale. I need some air," he said, quickly leaving the room. Amber watched him go, her heart heavy. She turned back to her parents, ready to face their questions and judgment. "Start from the beginning," Margaret said. "Tell us everything." And so Amber did. She told them about her struggles in Los Angeles, about Derek and the compromises she made. She explained about coming home, about the kiss with Luke, and her fears about the pregnancy. As she spoke, Amber felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she was being completely honest with her parents and herself. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Margaret spoke. "I always knew you'd come back to us," she said softly. Amber looked at her mother in surprise. "You did?" Margaret nodded. "A mother knows her child. I knew you'd find your way home eventually." John cleared his throat. "What about this Derek character? Is he still a threat?" Amber nodded, explaining Derek's ultimatum and her fears about his threats. "We'll deal with him," John said firmly. Together, Amber felt a rush of gratitude towards her father. Despite everything, he was still ready to protect her. Just then, Luke reappeared at the door. His eyes were red, and he looked like he'd aged years in the few minutes he'd been gone. "I called Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. "I told her everything. The engagement's off." Amber felt her heart sink. "Luke, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Luke shook his head. "It's not your fault. Not entirely, anyway. We all made choices that led us here." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The future, which had seemed so clear to Amber just days ago, was now uncertain. Margaret broke the silence. "Amber, what do you want to do? About the baby? About your life here?" Amber looked around the room, at her parents, and at Luke. She thought about the antique store, about her fledgling plan to save the library, about the life growing inside her. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to stay. I want to make things right." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Then that's what we'll do, together." As Amber looked at her family, she realized that this was just the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead: Derek's threats, the struggling store, her complicated relationship with Luke, and the impending arrival of her child. But for the first time in years, Amber didn't feel alone. She had her family, she had a purpose, and she had a chance to build the life she truly wanted. The road ahead would be difficult, but Amber was ready to face it head-on. It was time to stop running and start living. In the weeks following Margaret's awakening, Amber threw herself into revitalizing the antique store. One evening, as she sorted through old inventory, an idea struck her. "Dad," she called out, "what if we turned part of the store into a cultural space?" John looked up from his paperwork, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Amber explained her vision. A combination of antique store, local library, and community center. We could host events, showcase local artists, and still sell antiques. It could be the heart of the community again. John considered the idea. It's ambitious, but it might just work. The next day, Amber presented her plan to the town council. Initially skeptical, they warmed to the idea as Amber outlined the benefits for the community. "This could save our library and bring new life to Main Street," Mrs. Patel, the librarian, said enthusiastically. With the council's approval, Amber set to work. She reached out to local contractors, artists, and volunteers. To her surprise, the community rallied around the project. Luke, despite their complicated situation, offered his legal services pro bono to help navigate permits and contracts. "It's a great idea, Amber," he said. "The town needs this." As word spread, more people came forward to help. The high school woodshop class offered to build bookshelves. Local artists volunteered to paint murals. Even Clara, Luke's ex-fiancée, offered to help organize a fundraising event. Amber was overwhelmed by the support. For the first time since returning home, she felt truly accepted by the community. However, as the renovation progressed, an unexpected obstacle arose. The building's electrical system needed a complete overhaul, far exceeding the project's budget. "We can't open without bringing it up to code," the electrician explained. "It's a safety hazard." Amber felt her heart sink. They were so close to realizing her vision, and now this setback threatened to derail everything. As she pondered solutions, a familiar voice called out, "Hello, Amber." She turned to see Derek standing in the doorway, looking out of place in his designer suit. "What are you doing here?" Amber asked, wary. Derek smiled. "I came to see your big project. Word travels fast in Hollywood." Amber tensed, waiting for the threat or ultimatum. Instead, Derek surprised her. "I've got a proposition for you," he said. "A TV network is interested in doing a reality show about small-town revitalization. Your story would be perfect." Amber was skeptical. "Why would you want to help me?" Derek's expression softened. "Believe it or not, I always saw your potential, Amber. Even when you were doing those low-budget films, I knew you had something special." Amber was taken aback. "Then why did you threaten me?" "Business is business," Derek shrugged. "But this is a chance for both of us to do something meaningful." Amber considered his offer. The show could provide the funds they needed to complete the renovation. But could she trust Derek? As if reading her mind, Derek added, "No strings attached. You'd have creative control. Think about it, Amber. This could be huge for your town." Before Amber could respond, John entered the store. His face hardened when he saw Derek. "Everything okay here?" he asked, moving protectively towards Amber. Amber nodded. "Dad, this is Derek. He has an interesting proposal for us." As Amber explained Derek's offer, she saw the conflict on her father's face. He was clearly wary of Derek, but the potential benefits were hard to ignore. "We'll need to discuss this as a family," John said finally. Derek nodded. "Of course. Take your time. But not too much time. The network wants to move fast." After Derek left, Amber and John called an emergency meeting with Margaret and the town council. Opinions were divided, but eventually, they agreed to move forward with the show, with strict conditions to protect the town's interests. As news of the TV show spread, excitement built in the community. The renovation picked up pace, with volunteers working around the clock to prepare for the grand opening. Amber found herself at the center of it all, coordinating between the TV crew, contractors, and volunteers. Despite the stress, she felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. One evening, as Amber locked up the store, Luke approached her. "You're doing an amazing thing here," he said. Amber smiled. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without everyone's help." There was a moment of awkward silence before Luke spoke again. "Amber, about the baby." Amber tensed, unsure of what he would say. "I want you to know, I'm here for you. Whatever you decide, whatever you need." Tears welled up in Amber's eyes. "Thank you, Luke. That means a lot." As the grand opening approached, Amber felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The entire town was buzzing with anticipation. The success or failure of this project would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Amber, but for the whole community. Standing in the newly renovated space, surrounded by books, antiques, and local art, Amber placed a hand on her growing belly. Whatever the future held, she was ready to face it. She had found her purpose, reconnected with her roots, and was about to embark on a new chapter of her life. The grand opening was just days away, and Amber knew that everything was about to change. Again, the day of the grand opening dawned bright and clear. Amber woke early, her stomach a knot of nerves and excitement. She arrived at the store before sunrise, determined to ensure everything was perfect. "Amber, calm down," John said, watching his daughter fuss over a display. "Everything looks great." But Amber couldn't relax. This day represented so much more than just the opening of a store. It was her chance at redemption, her opportunity to give back to the community she had once abandoned. As the morning progressed, the street outside filled with curious onlookers. The TV crew bustled about, setting up cameras and conducting last-minute interviews with locals. Margaret arrived, looking tired but happy. "The whole town's talking about this," she told Amber. "You've really done something special here." Amber smiled, but inside doubt gnawed at her. What if it wasn't enough? What if she had let everyone down again? An hour before the opening, Amber retreated to the back room. She sat alone, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The weight of expectation felt overwhelming. A knock on the door startled her. It was Luke. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" Amber shook her head. "What if I've made a huge mistake? What if this all falls apart?" Luke sat beside her. "Amber, look at what you've accomplished already. The whole town is out there, excited and united. Whatever happens next, you've already succeeded." His words steadied her. Amber took a deep breath and nodded. "Thanks, Luke. I needed that." As they walked back to the main area, Amber noticed a sleek car pull up outside. A well-dressed man stepped out. The TV producer Derek had mentioned. "Showtime," Amber muttered to herself. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a blur. Amber found herself shaking hands, smiling for cameras, and giving sound bites to reporters. The store was packed, people exclaiming over the unique combination of antiques, books, and local art. Finally, it was time for Amber's speech. She stepped onto the small stage they had set up, facing the crowd of familiar faces. For a moment, stage fright threatened to overwhelm her. Then she caught sight of her parents. John and Margaret stood together, their faces beaming with pride. The sight gave Amber the courage she needed. "Welcome, everyone," she began. "This store has been a part of our community for generations. It's more than just a business. It's a piece of our history." As Amber spoke, she wove together the story of the store with her own journey. She talked about leaving town, chasing her dreams, and realizing that what she really wanted had been here all along. "This space represents second chances," Amber said, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "It's about preserving our past while building our future. It's about coming home." The crowd listened in rapt attention. Amber saw tears in many eyes, including her mother's. As she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. After the speech, The TV producer approached Amber. "That was incredible," he said. "I've got a proposition for you. We want to turn this into a series, not just about the store, but about you. Your journey, your story of redemption. It could be huge." Amber blinked in surprise. "A series? About me?" The producer nodded enthusiastically. "Your story is compelling. Girl leaves small town, faces challenges in the big city, comes home to save her family business and reconnect with her roots. It's got everything. What do you say?" Amber's mind raced. This was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of in Los Angeles. A chance at real fame, at making it big. But as she looked around at the store, at the faces of her family and friends, she felt torn. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," the producer said. "But don't take too long. This kind of opportunity doesn't come around often." As the producer walked away, Amber found herself at a crossroads. The store was a success, but this TV deal could take things to a whole new level. It was everything she had once wanted. But was it still what she wanted? John approached, having overheard the conversation. "Quite an offer," he said quietly. Amber nodded, still processing. "Yeah, it is. Whatever you decide, we're behind you," John said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Just remember why you came back home in the first place." As the day wound down and the last guest left, Amber stood in the middle of the store. The space hummed with new energy, filled with the echoes of laughter and conversation from the day. She had a decision to make. The bright lights of potential fame beckoned, but so did the warmth of home and family. The choice she made would shape not just her future, but the future of her unborn child and the entire community. Amber took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. The morning after the grand opening, Amber called a meeting with her family, Luke, and the TV producer. She had spent a sleepless night weighing her options, but as the sun rose, she felt a sense of clarity. "I've made my decision," Amber announced to the group. "I'm staying here in Pine Grove. I want to focus on expanding our business locally." The TV producer looked disappointed. "Are you sure? This could be a huge opportunity." Amber nodded firmly. "I'm sure. My place is here, with my family and this community." Her parents exchanged proud glances. Luke's face broke into a relieved smile. "What about the show?" the producer asked. Amber thought for a moment. "What if we did a special instead? One episode about the store's transformation and the town's revitalization. It could inspire other small communities." The producer considered this. "That could work. It's not what we originally planned, but there's definitely a story here." With the decision made, Amber felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Luke, who had been quietly supportive throughout the process. "Luke, can we talk privately?" she asked. They stepped outside, the morning sun warming their faces. "I want to apologize," Amber began. "For everything. The kiss, the complications with Clara, all of it." Luke shook his head. "Amber, we both made mistakes, but I'm glad you're staying. I want to be part of your life, and our child's life, in whatever way you're comfortable with." Amber felt tears welling up. "I'd like that," she said softly. They hugged, a gesture of forgiveness and new beginnings. Over the next few weeks, Amber threw herself into integrating the library into the new cultural space. Mrs. Patel worked closely with her, marveling at how seamlessly the books fit alongside the antiques. "It's like they were always meant to be here," Mrs. Patel said, arranging a display of local history books. Amber nodded, running her hand over a shelf. "Each item here has a story. Now we get to share those stories with everyone." As they worked, Amber found herself naturally spinning tales about the antiques, weaving their histories with the town's own stories. Customers would gather around, listening intently as she spoke. One evening, as Amber was locking up, her mother approached. "You know, you always loved stories," Margaret said. "Even as a little girl, you were always making up tales about the things in the store." Amber smiled, remembering. "I guess I did. Maybe that's your true calling," Margaret suggested. "Not acting, but storytelling. You're doing it now, through this place. Amber considered this. She thought about the joy she felt sharing the stories of the antiques, the books, and the town. It was a different kind of performance, but one that felt genuine and fulfilling. The day of the TV special's premiere arrived. The whole town gathered in the store to watch. As the episode played, showcasing the transformation of the store and the community's involvement, Amber felt a surge of pride. She looked around at the faces of her family and friends, all beaming with joy and accomplishment. Her father, once distant, now stood with his arm around her mother. Luke sat nearby, his presence a comforting support. As the credits rolled, applause filled the store. People began sharing their own memories of the place, adding to the rich tapestry of stories that made up their community. In that moment, Amber realized she had found her true passion. It wasn't in the bright lights of Hollywood, but here, in this small town, telling the stories that connected people to their past and to each other. Months passed, and the store continued to thrive. Amber's belly grew along with the business, a visible reminder of the new life she was building. One quiet evening, as Amber was closing up, she paused to look around the store. The shelves were filled with antiques, each with its own history. The library corner buzzed with children reading. Local art adorned the walls. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling a kick from the baby within. "This is our story now," she whispered. John and Margaret entered, ready to take Amber home for a family dinner. Luke was coming too, their relationship evolving into a deep friendship and shared anticipation of parenthood. As they left the store, Amber took one last look back. The place that had once represented obligation now stood as a symbol of her journey, her growth, and her home. Amber stepped out into the cool evening air, surrounded by her family. She had come full circle, returning to her roots only to find that they had been the foundation for something beautiful all along. As they walked down Main Street, the lights of the store glowed behind them, a beacon of community and hope. Amber smiled, her heart full. She had found her place in the world, and it had been here all along. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities. There would be challenges, of course, but Amber knew she could face them. She had the support of her family, her community, and the strength she had found within herself. This was her happily ever after, not the one she had once imagined, but one far richer and more fulfilling than she could have ever dreamed. As the months passed, Amber's decision to stay in Pine Grove proved to be the right one. The store became a hub of community activity, hosting book clubs, antique appraisal days, and local art exhibitions. Amber's storytelling sessions, where she would share the histories of various antiques, became a popular weekly event. The TV special about the store's transformation aired nationally, bringing unexpected attention to Pine Grove. Tourists began to trickle in, curious to see the small town that had reinvented itself. This influx brought new challenges and opportunities, which Amber and the community tackled together. Amber's pregnancy progressed, and the town rallied around her. Women who had once judged her now organized a baby shower. The high school woodworking class surprised her by crafting a beautiful crib, using wood from an old bookshelf that had been in the store for generations. Luke remained a constant support, attending doctor's appointments and helping with the store. Their friendship deepened, evolving into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. While romance wasn't on the cards, they found a comfortable co-parenting arrangement that worked for both of them. As her due date approached, Amber focused on training Mrs. Patel and a group of volunteers to run the store in her absence. She was determined to take a proper maternity leave, something she never thought she'd prioritize in her former life. The birth of Amber's daughter, whom she named Hope, was a town-wide celebration. The store closed for a day, with a sign on the door reading, "Closed for a new arrival, stories resuming tomorrow." Returning to work with Hope in tow, Amber found a new rhythm to her life. She set up a small nursery in the back of the store, allowing her to balance motherhood with her business responsibilities. Customers often found Amber telling stories with Hope cradled in one arm, the baby seemingly as entranced by the tales as the audience. As Hope grew, so did the store's impact on the community. Amber initiated a program where local schools would bring students to learn about history through the antiques. She partnered with the community college to offer workshops on restoration and preservation techniques. The success of the store inspired other small businesses in town. A vacant lot next door was transformed into a community garden, supplying fresh produce to local restaurants. The old movie theater reopened, showing a mix of classics and independent films. On the first anniversary of the store's grand reopening, Amber organized a town-wide celebration. As she stood on the makeshift stage, Hope on her hip, she marveled at how much had changed in just 1 year. "A year ago, I thought I was giving up my dreams by coming back here," Amber addressed the crowd. "But I've realized that dreams can change, and sometimes they lead us right back home." She went on to announce the store's latest initiative, a scholarship fund for local students interested in pursuing careers in history, library science, or the arts. It was her way of ensuring that the next generation would have opportunities she once thought she needed to leave town to find. As the celebration continued around her, Amber found a quiet moment with her parents. John, who had once been so disappointed in her choices, now looked at her with unmistakable pride. Margaret, fully recovered and more vibrant than ever, cooed at Hope. "You've done good, kiddo," John said, squeezing Amber's shoulder. "You've done real good." Amber felt tears welling up. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you both." As the sun set on Pine Grove, casting a warm glow over the town, Amber stood in front of the store, Hope asleep in her arms. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the mistakes, the hardships, the unexpected joys. She realized that her Hollywood dreams hadn't been wrong, just incomplete. She had wanted to tell stories, to touch people's lives, to make a difference. Now she was doing all of that, just in a way she never could have imagined. The store, with its blend of past and present, had become more than just a business. It was a living, breathing story, one that Amber was writing every day, with the help of her family, her community, and now her daughter. As she locked up for the night, Amber felt a deep sense of contentment. She had found her happily ever after, not in the spotlight of fame, but in the warm glow of home. If you enjoyed Amber's journey of self-discovery and redemption, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found your purpose in an unexpected place? Your story could inspire others? Remember, sometimes the greatest adventures lead us right back home.